I was ready to punch Cecil Jacobs in the face. He'd announced in the schoolyard the day before that Scout Finch's daddy defends his Negroes. I asked Atticus, "Do you defend Negroes, Atticus?" Atticus replied, "Of course I do. And don't say Negro, Scout. That's common. This is what everybody says at school. From now on, it'll be everyone less one." "Well, if you don't want me growing up talking that way, why do you send me to school?" Atticus looked at me, amused. Atticus said that he was defending a Negro by the name of Tom Robinson. He lives in the settlement beyond the town dump. He goes to Calpurnia's church, and she knows his family well. She says that they are clean living folk. There are people who say I shouldn't defend him. If you shouldn't be defending him, then why are you doing it? Well, for a number of reasons, said Atticus. The main one is that if I didn't, I couldn't hold up my head in town. I couldn't even represent this county in legislature. I couldn't even tell you or Jem not to do something. You mean that if you didn't defend that man, Jem and me wouldn't have to mind you anymore? That's about right. Why? Because I couldn't ever ask you to mind me again. Scout, simply by the nature of the work, every lawyer gets at least one case in his lifetime that affects him personally. This one's mine, I guess. You might hear some ugly talk about it in school. But do one thing for me, if you will. You just hold your head high and keep those fists down, no matter what anybody says to you. Don't let them get your goat. Try fighting with your head for a change. It's a good one, even if it does resist learning. Atticus, are we going to win it? No, honey. Then why? Simply because we were licked 100 years before we started. It's no reason for us not to try to win, Atticus said. I tried to keep this in mind when I wanted to fight Cecil Jacobs in the schoolyard. I knew that if I did fight him, I would be letting Atticus down. Christmas was coming, and I felt mixed about it. On the good side, Uncle Jack Finch was coming, and he would spend a week with us. On the bad side, we would have to see Aunt Alexandra and Francis. We went to Finch's Landing every Christmas Day. I didn't like spending time with Francis. He was a year older than I, and I avoided him. Aunt Alexandra was Atticus's sister, and Francis was her grandson. I was sure she was swapped at birth and that my grandparents had gotten the wrong child. Uncle Jack was the baby of the family. We were on our way to pick up Uncle Jack at the train station on Christmas Eve. He had 2 packages with him. I was curious about what they were. When we got home, we decorated the tree until bedtime. The next morning, we dived for the packages. They were from Atticus. He had Uncle Jack get them for us. We had even asked for them, air rifles. We got to Finch's Landing. I asked Francis what he got for Christmas. Just what I asked for, he said. Francis had requested a pair of knee pants, a red leather book sack, and an untied bow tie. That's nice, I lied. Jem and me got air rifles, and Jem got a chemistry set. A toy one, I reckon. No, a real one. He's going to make me some invisible ink, and I'm going to write to Dill in it. Francis was such a boring child. He told Aunt Alexandra everything he knew, and Aunt Alexandra then told Atticus. She didn't like the way I dressed in overalls, and that I couldn't possibly hope to be a lady if I wore breeches. Aunt Alexandra's vision of me involved playing with small stoves, tea sets, and wearing that Ada pearl necklace she gave me when I was born. Francis got me real angry. He first talked bad about Dill, and then about Atticus defending Tom Robinson. Grandma says it's bad enough he lets you run wild, but now he's turning out to be a Negro lover, and will never be able to walk the streets of Maycomb again. He's ruining the family. That's what he's doing. I got so mad at him. I chased him into the kitchen that's separate from the house, and he kept calling Atticus a Negro lover. I just had to punch him in the face. I got punished by Uncle Jack and I told him I hated him. He didn't even listen to my side of the story. I ran to Atticus for comfort and finally told Uncle Jack my side of the story. Uncle Jack got real mad at Francis when he found out what he had said about Atticus. He was going to tell Atticus, but I begged him not to. I would prefer him to think that Francis and I fought over something else. Later, when Atticus and Jack were talking, Jack didn't tell Atticus the specifics of his and my conversation. But he did say that he learned a lot from me today. And he was also upset that Jem and I were going to have to learn some ugly things in our lives. Atticus hoped that Jem and I would get the answers from him about what was going to happen in the trial rather than learning it from the town. Chapter 10. Atticus was old and feeble. He was nearly 50. Jem and I were disappointed he wasn't more like the younger fathers in Maycomb. Atticus was always too tired to play football with Jem like the other dads. He wore glasses because he was nearly blind in his left eye. When he gave us our air rifles, Atticus wouldn't teach us to shoot. Uncle Jack taught us and explained that Atticus wasn't interested in guns. Atticus said to Jem one day, I'd rather you shoot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want, if you can hit them. But remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. Later, I asked Miss Maudie why Atticus said that. She said, your father's right. Mockingbirds don't do one thing, but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. I complained to Miss Maudie that Atticus was too old to do anything. She said that he was a great lawyer and the best checker player in town, that I should be proud of him. One day, Jem and I were walking down the street with our new air rifles, and Jem spotted something. What you looking at? I asked. That old dog down yonder, he said. That's Harry Johnson's dog, whose name's Tim Johnson. Ain't it? The dog was acting strangely. Jem got worried, thinking he might have rabies. He called the cow to come out into the street and take a look at the dog. When Calpurnia saw the dog, she was sure it had rabies. She called on the telephone to Atticus's office. Mr. Finch, this is Cal. I swear to God, there's a mad dog walking down the street a piece. He's coming this way. It's old Tim Johnson. Then Cal called the operator and asked her to call Miss Rachel, Dill's aunt, and Miss Stephanie Crawford and anyone else on the street to warn them to lock their doors and stay inside. It's very dangerous for anyone to be bitten by a dog with rabies. Mr. Heck Tate was the sheriff of Maycomb County. He showed up with a rifle. Atticus showed up as well. The dog was pretty far down the street, but it was headed towards the Finch's place. Atticus told Heck that he'd better go ahead and shoot the dog, put it out of its misery. But Heck handed the rifle to Atticus and said, Take him, Mr. Finch. Jem and I couldn't believe that Heck would ask our father to try to shoot. Atticus said, Don't be silly, Heck, you shoot him. Mr. Finch, this is a one-shot job. Atticus shook his head vehemently. Don't just stand there, Heck. He won't wait all day for you. Heck said, For God's sake, Mr. Finch, look where he is. If I miss, a bullet will go straight into the Radley's house. I can't shoot that well, and you know it. Atticus replied, I haven't shot a gun in 30 years. Mr. Tate almost threw the rifle at Atticus. I'd feel mighty comfortable if you did now, he said. Jem and I watched our father take the gun and walk out into the middle of the street. He walked quickly, but I felt like I was watching the whole thing in slow motion. I couldn't understand why the sheriff wouldn't want Atticus to do the shooting. Atticus pushed his glasses to his forehead. They slipped down, and then he dropped them in the street. I heard them crack. Atticus rubbed his eyes and chin. We saw him blink hard, and with movements so swift they seemed simultaneous, Atticus's hand yanked a ball-tipped lever as he brought the gun to his shoulder, and the rifle cracked. Tim Johnson leapt, flopped over, and crumpled onto the sidewalk in a brown and white heap. He died instantly. Atticus had shot him right between the eyes. Mr. Tate said, You haven't forgotten much, Mr. Finch. You're still a great shooter. Miss Maudie yelled across the street, I saw that one-shot, Finch. Jem was totally stunned. So was I. Mr. Tate saw our shock and said, "What's the matter with you, boy? Can't you talk? Didn't you know your daddy's—" Atticus interrupted. Hush. Heck, let's go back to work. After Atticus and Mr. Tate left, Miss Maudie told us that Atticus was known as Old One Shot because when he was younger, he was the best shot in all of Maycomb. We were so impressed. When I asked why he never goes hunting, Miss Maudie said, "If your father's anything, he's civilized in his heart. Shooting is a gift of God, a talent. Oh, you have to practice to make it perfect. But shooting's different from playing the piano." I think maybe Atticus put down his gun when he realized that God had given him an unfair advantage over most living things. I guess he decided he wouldn't want to shoot till he had to, and today he had to. I said, "It seems like he should be proud of his talent." Miss Maudie replied, "People in their right minds never take pride in their talents." I didn't understand all this. I told Jim that we were sure to have something to brag about at school on Monday, now that we knew our dad was the best shooter in Maycomb. But Jim told me not to say anything about it at school. He seemed to think that bragging wasn't so important anymore. It wasn't a very grown up thing to do. He said, "Atticus is real old." But I wouldn't care if he couldn't do anything. I wouldn't care if he couldn't do a blessed thing. Atticus is a gentleman, just like me. It seemed Jim realized that a gentleman doesn't brag about his talents and doesn't use his talents to take advantage of other people or animals.